In this lecture segment, we are talking about trends in Gothic art and finishing our discussion of Gothic architecture, stressing the links between this style and the French monarchy. We are focusing on two commissions by French queens and a palace chapel for a French king. Returning to Chartres, let's take a look at a stained glass window in the north transept of the cathedral. This bank of windows was donated to the church by the then Regent of France, Blanche of Castile, on behalf of her son Louis IX around 1220. Remember that Chartres is dedicated to the Virgin Mary and has as its major relic the clothing she wore when giving birth to Christ. Many Gothic churches, including this one in France, are named Notre Dame, which means Our Lady. They are part of the rise in the cult of the Virgin in the Gothic period when Mary's role in helping people achieve salvation increased. We saw the beginnings of this in the Morgan Madonna Romanesque sculpture we looked at, but we see a profusion of images of the Virgin in the Gothic period and in stained glass that stresses Mary and her burgeoning role in salvation as an embodiment of the Church and the Queen of Heaven. The windows include a 42-foot in diameter rose window, which in its very design connects to Mary, as one of her monikers was the rose without thorns, or that she is without sin, as Mary was believed to have been immaculately conceived, meaning that her mother Anne was a virgin. The center of the rose window depicts the Virgin and Child enthroned, like what we saw with the Morgan Madonna, surrounded by kings and prophets and other iconography. The scenes in the rose window are supported by the lancet windows below that show Mary's mother, Saint Anne, and 4 Old Testament prophets. Symbols of the French monarchy, the gold fleur-de-lis on a blue background here, and in the quatrefoil shapes here, the 4-lobed shamrock forms, show the connection between this window and the French monarchy, while the gold castles on a red background are the symbol of Queen Blanche's royal family of origin in Spain. The window makes a clear statement about the royal family's patronage of this structure and the links between Gothic and royal patronage. This window is very close to the altar at the church, which is just down here out of view. So this window made a very public statement about French monarchical power and piety. The tracery or stone frame over and around the window here also produces a lace-like effect over the rose window, creating a delicate pattern of silhouettes through which the jeweled stained glass radiates. Again, like the Hagia Sophia, we see materials in church construction and decoration being used to seem like something they are not, as what should be a solid wall at Chartres is instead eaten away into glass. A contemporary theologian who lived at the same time as Abbot Suger said that, quote, stained glass windows are the holy scriptures, and since their brilliance lets the splendor of true light, he means the divine light of deity, pass into the church, they enlighten those inside. This example of royal patronage served a dual function in heightening both the spiritual environment of the church and in making a public statement about monarchical power and piety. Another object that was donated by a female member of the French royal family is this depiction of the Virgin and Child from the late Gothic period. It was given by a queen, Jeanne d'Evreux, the wife of Charles IV, in 1333 to Saint-Denis, Abbot Suger's church and the birthplace of the Gothic style. It is about 2 feet tall and is one of many similar sculptures made at this time for churches or for private devotion in homes, part of this upswing in devotion to the Virgin Mary, the cult of the Virgin that we talked about. It is an object that oozes expense and luxury, finely crafted of gilt silver or silver covered in gold. Mary's body epitomizes the style of this period, with its elongation and elegant sway, with drapery that does not reveal her body to us, but instead adds to the pronounced, graceful position of the figure. At its base are enameled scenes from the life of Christ, and above a warm, familiar depiction of the Virgin and Child. They are having a tender moment, as a baby who looks like a baby reaches out and touches his mother's face. But she is not just a mom. In keeping with the greater importance of Mary theologically, she is depicted as the Queen of Heaven, and she used to wear a crown, but that is now lost. She's also linked to the French monarchy, as she holds a scepter with the fleur-de-lis on it. And this scepter is not just a scepter, but is also a reliquary purported to have held strands of the Virgin Mary's hair. So we see this melding of royal and religious significance in this object that was gifted to Saint-Denis, where French kings were buried. If we compare this Gothic depiction of the Virgin and Child to our Romanesque example, we see similar iconography but significant differences. The gilt-silver Gothic example was made under royal patronage for an abbey church linked to the royal family, while the carved wooden Romanesque example was made in a pilgrimage context as an object for popular worship, used in processions and events. The Romanesque example is iconic, frontal, with deep connections to Byzantine art showing Mary as the throne of wisdom or a vessel for Christ. But the Gothic example shows Mary as the Queen of Heaven in a more human moment between mother and child, using an elegant and courtly style popular in the Gothic period. Let's look at one final Gothic example to conclude our discussion. The Sainte-Chapelle is part of the judicial complex in Paris, very close to Notre Dame. It's tucked into the complex and is in a secure area today. It was commissioned by Louis IX, King of France. His mother was the one who donated the stained glass window we talked about to Chartres on his behalf, as a private chapel for his private worship services, so similar to Charlemagne's palace chapel at Aachen in purpose. Louis acquired some important relics from Constantinople and had this chapel built to hold the relics. These relics included both the crown of thorns and the nails used in the crucifixion of Christ. The relics for the chapel were incredibly expensive. The cost to construct the chapel was only about 1/4 of the cost to purchase the relics. It was not a public space. It was very much for the private use and display of the king. This structure distills very beautifully the essence of the Gothic style, creating what is a big Gothic reliquary that you can walk into like it's a treasure chest or a jewel box. In this engraving of the structure, you can get a good view and understanding of it as a whole. It has a lower level which helps to support the structure, and then the main sanctuary space is on the second level, which is where you see the tall windows. It does not have any flying buttresses. Instead, iron rods circle the structure, camouflaged into it to support and hold it together, almost like the wooden parts of a barrel being pulled together by the metal rings that loop over the barrel. The network of thin buttresses that you see here at this end of the chapel are narrow, carefully placed buttresses on the exterior that are camouflaged on the interior, running on thin verticals between the windows on the interior of the chapel. When you enter the main space and look toward the altar end, this is what you are greeted by, a space which literally feels like you have walked into the type of church Abbot Suger described. The walls have dissolved into glass, like an extended and elongated clerestory made up of narrow lancet windows. The buttresses are camouflaged behind these supports, hidden to such a degree that you do not even notice them. Down at the far end of the structure is the reliquary where those very special relics would be kept in the structure, that in essence is again like a built reliquary for them. In this image, we look up at the vault, again using those key elements of Gothic architecture, the pointed arch and rib vaulting, combining them in such a way that they were able to create this intimate, exceptionally special and sacred place for these relics and the private worship of the French king. We see the rose window here, and then this dazzling sea of lancet windows that create a treasure chest for the visitor. Even though the Gothic style was closely associated with the French monarchy, the French will not have a monopoly on the Gothic, and there is a profusion of sacred and secular Gothic style structures in Europe. The elegant style of Gothic sculpture has significant influence on trends in art, especially in Northern Europe.